It's March 9, and you're on Global TV Talk Show. Thank you for being there. It's approaching 9 a.m. here in sunny LA, and it's happy hour in London and wine time in Paris. And in just a few minutes, the California Masterminds are going to convene here on Global TV. And we're going to be talking about well-being in the workplaces, creating a culture for well-being to happen in the workplaces, at home, and in the communities. A very special guest today, our old friends, known for some time, mixed in with new acquaintances. Well, Paul Falcone is in LA, and he and I have known each other a very long time. He is a well-known author about leadership and within the corporate structure, and has written best-selling books and is in the HarperCollins Leadership Circle and is coming out with a brand new book. Pretty soon he'll talk about it once we get live today. Also, Kim Condon will be on the program, and she's a global vice president of Herbalife Nutritions, which is a $5 billion company based in LA. And she has a long history of being a leader in people issues, human resources management, talent management, all kinds of roles. And she's joining us. Also, Jennifer Louisel, and she'll pronounce that better than me in just a few minutes. She worked with Paul Falcone at the Motion Picture and TV Actors Fund, and she's an insurance specialist, a benefits specialist, and she'll bring that view to the discussion today, very practical info. Also, we have a preeminent headhunter, executive search, a retained executive search, Gary Sanger, and he's in LA also, and he and Paul go way back, and it's a tight circle today. And also joining me today in the conversation is Stephen Howard, author of 22 books, including recently published Humany. That's Humony. And that's a word he made up to describe harmony in the workplace from a positive point of view. And his favorite line is, nobody wakes up in the morning asking to be managed. They want to be led, they want to be coached. And his book about Humany has recently won a gold medal for its practicality and its interesting way of looking at the situation today, post-COVID, in a hybrid workplace. So Stephen Howard will be joining us, and we're going to have an interesting conversation. And we'll begin in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned. Thank you. Here we are, Global TV Talk Show, and our masterminds of people, talent, everything connected with it. Paul Falcone, Kim Condon, Jennifer Louisel. Would you pronounce your name better than me?
Louisel.
Louisel, great.
Yes.
Welcome, first time. And here's Stephen Howard. One second. Hello, Stephen, welcome.
Mr. Ed, how are you, sir?
This is Stephen Howard, Paul Falcone, Jennifer Louisel, and Kim Condon. Stephen Howard's coming to us today from Mexico City, but he's originally in Southern California, Palm Springs area. So I've got the label of the name on the PR website, California Masterminds. We'll talk about well-being today. And so welcome. So, Stephen, I was just explaining to my friends here that you've written 22 books and Humany has just come out, and you were bequeathed a gold medal for the uniqueness of your approach. So, I welcome you to hold up the book cover and show our audience, if possible.
Hold on now, let me get rid of this silly background.
Okay.
There you go. That's a little.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So I started to explain Humany, but I'm going to stop talking, Stephen, because this is so interesting. Um, and this is the key audience right here, not only out there in the world through Global TV, but right here in the studio. Paul Falcone is an author of 15 or 16 books, and not to measure against your 22. It's just that he's in the HarperCollins leadership circle, but more about that in a minute. How did you come up with the name Humany?
Sitting on my balcony, having a glass of wine, watching the sun go down, and thinking during the pandemic that leadership needed to change a bit. And I was thinking about, and I've been reading a bit about some people call human leadership. I'm leading people. I thought, okay, human, that's a good word. And then I started thinking humanity. And then half an hour later, I started thinking, you know what the world really needs is more harmony, and particularly in the workplace. And so I just combined humanity, and harmony and made up a word. It's not in the dictionary yet. People want to apply for it, but I called it Humany. And it seems to have taken off. It seems to resonate with people. So I'm quite pleased.
And the Nonfiction Authors Association, we're so impressed with your brevity and your style that they snapped a gold medal on you.
I've never been called brevity as a writer before, but they called it a significant work with an important mission, which really pleased me because I'm very passionate about it. And I really would like to see, it's not for C-suite, it's for anybody who leads people. That's my definition of a leader. So it's starting to build some legs, as they say. It only came out a few months ago, so it's we're starting to, and now it's out an audiobook, Ed, and that's surprise. I didn't realize. I knew it was out in audiobook, and I didn't realize the number of sales all of a sudden. I just happened to look at it this morning, and wow, it's more people listening than reading almost, but that was quite good.
Yeah, multitasking, right? When they're out walking or running or on a train or a plane. Kim Condon, thanks so much for taking time out from your hugely busy schedule these days. So you're global, I'll try to get this right, I'm doing it from memory, global vice president with Herbalife Nutrition based in LA, $5 billion company. And that means you got people everywhere, right?
We do. We have people in 96 countries. So it's one of those always on roles.
Yeah, so you get emails around the clock, but you just don't look at them around the clock.
I try not to, but the truth is, I mean, with having, global is great. And it's also challenging because if I want to have all regions at one time, I have 3 or 4 meetings here that are going to be at 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. because it's hard to catch everyone.
Right. I'm learning that too. I do my Asia Pacifics at 4 or 5 p.m. here. So anyway, tell me about Herbalife Nutrition. Is that plant-based stuff, or is that a mixture, or what's happening?
Yeah. So our newest products include some plant-based products. Although traditionally it's more soy. Well, it's soy and whey based, so that's why some of them are not just plant based. But it's been around for 45 years, the company, and which is why we are lucky enough to be in so many different countries. And really, the spirit of the company is nutrition and wellness. So I was very excited that we were going to be talking about well-being because that's what we do. And just like any other company that I've worked with, you really want to make sure that the way you're looking to treat your customers and help your customers, you're looking to do the same with your employees. So that's a big focus for me.
So you were never managing people. You were always a coach, only that wasn't the rage as it is now. Is that right?
Who, me? No,
Yeah.
no. I've managed large teams. I have 50 some people today. I've had as many as 150 people on my teams.
So I want to introduce Gary Sanger, and man, needs no introduction to you guys, but to the audience out here in TV land. Welcome, Gary.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Nice to be here. I'm here in Los Angeles, and go UCLA Bruins.
You tell them,
Ooh.
Gary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jennifer, what are you doing now?
Right now, I'm really consulting. I'm consulting for private clients that need help with their health insurance. I've got a couple of clients that are needing really very delicate assistance with some really difficult situations. I've got a client who has a 40-year-old in the hospital right now with a brain injury, who really needs a lot of assistance and case management with their insurance and making sure that things go well. I've got another that has an older adult child who is having insurance issues. So I'm really just, taking things as they come and just helping people when they need it. And I've got a couple of clients that are employers that are needing assistance with their employees that are needing mental health care that can't find it. And that's been a really big issue as well.
Paul Falcone, welcome again. How do employers make it safe for employees to share their concerns about their personal lives at work? And at work means hybrid, I guess, right?
Yeah, it does. And the funny thing, Ed, we always go back to this idea of listening. How many managers just are good listeners? And the way I describe it is they listen with their eyes and with their heart, in addition to their ears. And you do have to make it safe, especially in today's environment. It seems to be crisis after crisis after crisis, right? We're all inundated with whether it's global warming or how many challenges you see when you put on the news at 10 o'clock at night. It's all about the gunfire and what's going on in Washington, D.C. and COVID and, more and more and more of this stuff. I think people are afraid. I think their wires are exposed and they're tired. A good manager is going to be someone who can tap into that with their team and hopefully make it safe for them to be able to talk about A, how these things are affecting them, and B, what the manager and the rest of the team can do to help everybody. We've got to have each other's backs going through this period. It's just a particularly difficult time.
Everybody out there, Paul Falcone and I've known each other a while, and he in previous life was in charge of people for Nickelodeon and Paramount, and I forget what else, but you've got a long history of leading people in the entertainment industry.
It has been, Ed, and it's also healthcare and biotech, and I've also done a little financial services too. So I always wanted to have, interestingly enough, to inform my writing, I wanted to make sure I worked in multiple industries, different sizes of companies, nonprofit, international, the whole nine yards, because you want to get a feel for how things work in different settings.
Yeah. So let's talk about, if you don't mind, being my leader here on Gen Y, Gen Z, working remotely, because it's the young people that are very much into both. They want to socialize, but they also want to just sit and do their work and not be bothered with anybody.
That's a good way to put it. So the funny thing is, everyone, when you look at Gen Y, the millennials, and you look at Gen Z, the Zoomers, they're now about, I think it's last I read, it's about 42% of the workplace. But that number is changing very quickly, especially as the baby boom retires. And so they're the most studied generational cohorts in history. We know everything about them. And that helps us because as employers, we want to know, how do you create that right kind of record, that right kind of environment for people? So what they're looking for, generally speaking, is career and professional development. They are looking for some kind of work-life family balance. They like this idea of environmentalism and corporate social responsibility. You're seeing a lot of this idea of diversity of thoughts and ideas and voices. I mean, basically, we know what they want. And that's really a smart strategy for any company to follow, is how to meet those needs, because they're noble needs. They're good needs, and companies would be wise to do so, including mental health.
Paul, one of the books that you've written many books, and you've got a new one coming out in what, September?
Yeah.
Yeah. What is that new book going to be called?
Leading through crisis, because everybody's hair is on fire these days, Ed. At least that's how I feel. And a lot of people feel that way too. So it's like, how do you deal with these situations, whether it's global pandemics or it's just crises that can happen with one of your people? So it's like individual versus departmental versus company crises. And that's kind of how I approached it.
One of the books, I'm probably going to get this title wrong, so please just, correct me. I have no ego in this, but you've written one of the books was an immediate bestseller through SHRM and through the large organizations of employers, major employers, 2,600 conversations you shouldn't have, or that you could have.
You're close. You're close. It's good. It's 101 tough conversations to have with employees. It's good. It's good.
So how do you have a conversation with someone who's not visible, except on Zoom?
Yeah, well, Zoom is kind of the new thing, and I know that. And the remote piece is really hard. It's almost like when you think about basics of leadership, it's just that on steroids. You have to be much more focused. You have to be much more intentional. You have to be much more purposeful. You have to build in time to be able to connect with your employees. One of the things that, when you asked before about the generations, Gen Z, the Zoomers, the 25 and under crowd, is coming back, and study after study showing they are the most isolated and loneliest generational cohort on the planet. And we've lost the ability to sit around the campfire and pass wisdom from the elders down to the younger generation. We're just too busy, and we're on cell phones and all this other kind of stuff. So the reality becomes, whether it's that one-on-one meeting that you're having by phone or Zoom, or that staff meeting that you're having, you've got to make it social. It has to have its social element, even when people aren't on site. So that becomes more critical now than ever.
So this stack of books behind me is just a prop to show off my favorite piece of artwork here in my living room, which is a giraffe, of course. But I haven't written any of those books, but I've read them. So one of these days, Stephen Howard's going to help me write a book. But right now, I'm just preoccupied being a happy TV talk show host. And Gary Sanger has been on, I forget how many, 12 or 13. And thank you very much, Gary. Welcome back.
Well, it's not as many shows as what Paul has written books, that's for sure.
So
it's
what's
nice
new?
to be here. It's nice to be
Please.
here. And when you look at the cross section of what leaders need to lead, I have the pleasure this afternoon of being in an executive group of probably 15 to 20 people. They haven't told me exactly how many are going to be there. And it's from a client where we put their CEO into that organization almost 20 years ago. He's the CEO. He took over for the founder. That $80 million company and probably 300-400 people 20 years ago was on probation. It was 80 million, and today's version of that is $500 million in revenue, 1,200 people, and it has 8 or 10 locations. It's also on the acquisition trail. And so when you look at how that organization makes a great org structure, how does it deliver to its client? How does it brace for this retiring CEO in the next few years to go bigger, grow better? I said to Michael, what's your goal out of this session? And I'm privileged as a retained headhunter to be a part of it. He says, I want to be able to grow a lot bigger. Now, if you think of simplicity, here's this organization now trying to swallow this $500 million revenue and 1,200 employee organization. How does it build itself to double? And I don't know, I've always been a fan of the GE structure where in fact they say, look, forced rankings. And that's probably not favorable by 80% of the people out there running business organizations. My simplicity is, and I'm a farm boy from Idaho from way back when. You got 1,000 employees, and let's say 10% of them are great and 10% of them are awful. You put those two groups together, and what do you have? You got average. Now you take out that bottom group, you either fix them or take them out, and you keep raising the bar. I'm just enthralled with that. I'm just really intrigued with that. That's a better word as to how you do that. And we're dealing with the 20-year-olds and we're dealing with the 60-year-olds and a lot of people in between. I think that's a fantastic challenge, here for the 6 of us on this Zoom.
Kim, in your vast past experience in leadership roles, you were connected with the entertainment industry, and now you're in the pill business, or what? Is it different?
I'm not a pusher. Yeah.
So are the people different? In terms of what they need?
Yeah, in terms of what they need. I have to really think about that for a minute, because I was going to say yes, but at the most basic level, kind of going back to what Paul was saying, you kind of go back to like that Maslow hierarchy of needs. I mean, people need the same thing. Is they need to feel like they are in a safe environment, building that safety. They need to feel like it's a place where they could see themselves, from an inclusion standpoint. I think that it's been such a big challenge, and at the same time, a really exciting time as we learn more about what people need, and that companies are recognizing that we actually need to know what people need. That's probably to me one thing that is perhaps a little further along in non-entertainment companies. Entertainment, tend to be not quite as focused about what the employees need, but that's shifting as well. So I think what really strikes me as why it's an exciting time is that it's not just work-life balance, which is critical, but it's actually work-life integration, right? And as we've been moving along in kind of the whole hybrid, and then remote, and then hybrid, and then companies saying, okay, CEOs saying, okay, we're tired of this. Like 2 years ago, some said, we're tired of this, come back to work or else. Nobody came back to work, and they didn't have an or else because they still needed to have a company. To where we are today with CEOs saying, come back or else 3 to 4 days a week. And people are doing it because now it's more of an expectation and a norm. And going back to that safety piece of it, you're really trying to figure out, okay, so there's good things about this and there's bad things about this for employees, and how do we support them so that we're supporting the company and making sure that that we end up with the best productive and engaged employees that we can. And just one last thing about that is that when I say there's good things and bad things about sort of this whole return to office, what I see is earlier on, when everybody was remote or most people were remote, and leadership was like, oh, we need to bring people back, and I'm like, but why? And they're like, well, the culture. And studies were showing that it wasn't impacting the culture, it wasn't impacting collaboration, it wasn't impacting productivity. And then, in fact, productivity was up, right? And then there was started to be a burnout phase, and productivity sort of, became neutral. But then, as we got towards around December or January of January of this year, December of last year, the research started to change. And that's when, Paul mentioned about mental health. That's when it was very clear that it was really having a negative impact on people's mental health to be so isolated. And, so it's really important that we started to bring people back into the organization. Look, I'm at home right now. I'll be going into the office later, but I mean, I like having my dog right here. It's fantastic. It makes me very, very happy. But at the same time, it's not that same kind of energy as when I go into the office and I see my coworkers and that kind of thing. But as long as I can figure out a way that I still, in my case, get to see my dog, get to work out, and still be seen as and have it still be a safe place for me to feel like I'm seen as productive, instead of like, oh, geez, Kim's coming in at 10:30. I wonder if she was working before she's, that trusting piece. That's the critical piece that people are looking for, no matter what industry, no matter, what position. So I guess that's a long answer to people are people in a lot of ways.
Let's go to Stephen Howard. So we certainly want to learn more about you and your book, but let's please address this idea that I have, that is engagement, feedback, getting leaders, managers, coaches, getting feedback easier with a remote workforce?
I will echo what Kim just said. It's going to come down to the individual on both sides, the individual employee and the individual leader, the individual manager. I mean, I think, though, what we have to understand is that we go back 30 or 40 years ago. I mean, I was an expat in 1980. And my boss had to keep me engaged. He was based in Dallas, Texas. We didn't have mobile phones then. We didn't even have email, quite frankly. The company I had an internal electronic system of sorts. Didn't work all the time. But we found ways to get across time zones and get across geographies and keep engaged, and kept me in tune with what was happening in the business and headquarters in Dallas. And I was living in Singapore at the time. So a lot of this is going to be adaptability, flexibility. And I think, hopefully, the smart companies and the smart leaders, so you don't have to have a company policy. I mean, you can do this on a department level, division level, whatever. They're going to have to understand that for some people, working at home and hybrid is beneficial. For others, such as Kim, work in the office, but, come in later and work later. I think we're going to have to, and that's where the harmony part comes in. It's not work-life balance, it's work-life harmony. And the way I harmonize my life with work, and the way Paul does, and the way Jennifer does, and the way Susan does, and everybody else is going to be different. So I think flexibility is going to be critical.
Jennifer, your approach is mental health, well-being, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing that I found is that people can't find mental health. They can't find providers. They can't find help. And, I was listening to Paul talk about, people having the issues of isolation and being that generation. They might be the most lonely, but and the ones that don't want to go into the office, but they're also the ones that don't want to go on Zoom to see a therapist. They really actually want to go in person, and you can't find therapists anymore to go in person. It's really, really difficult. So my biggest thing that I've been helping employers with is finding groups of therapists to provide to their employees that have already been vetted, that have therapists available that they can either do Zoom with or go in person, and are actually open, because there's just not enough available right now.
So you're talking about social workers, like EAP people?
No, actual full marriage family therapist, or PhDs, including psychiatrists, for those that need to find one, that are just not able to find them right now. It has been the hardest time for people to find some that are available, that are in their network with their employer benefits, and that are open and accepting new patients. And if an employer actually, they don't have to give them names, but if they have groups of them that have already been vetted, that they know are in the network and they know are accepting new patients, that is the biggest gift that they can give their employees. And just have it available on their employee website so that they have access and that they don't feel like they're in a, you know, a really troubled time and can't find somebody.
So Stephen, with a humany approach, is it easier to measure results?
I don't think it changes. I think you're going to get better results with the humany approach because for several reasons. One, you'll have reduced resignations, reduced quiet quitting. I mean, nobody wants to be managed. The underlying concept of humany is people want to be led, they want to be empowered, they want to be motivated, they want to be inspired, and most importantly, they want to be challenged to grow professionally and personally. But they don't want to be managed, and they certainly don't wake up in the morning and say, I can't wait to be micromanaged by my boss. So changing that concept, the concept of humany is that we manage processes, policies, procedures, things, but we should get out of our heads that we manage people. And part of this, and I'm going to, you know, sort of, it's a philosophical mindset change. And I go back to what Gary talked about earlier about, I think it was Gary, might have been Paul. I think it was Gary about the, you know, the GE system and the lowest 10%. What irks me as a former employee in those large organizations and as a consultant to those large organizations is when you get rid of that, you start getting rid of that lower 10%, what people always call those poor performers. Who the heck hired them in the first place? Who the heck has been managing them in the first place? Who has been leading them, if anybody? And why aren't they being held responsible for those so-called poor performers? Now, I met some people have a bad attitude. Some people just want to work and clock in and clock out. But that's the managing aspect. And my approach is minimize the managing of people and think about how we're going to lead people. If you lead people, one of the things I would be willing to bet, you'll find you only get 5% poor performers or 4%. You're not going to have that 10 to 12% that is typical on your bell curve. That's my theory.
Paul Falcone, and from the entertainment industry point of view, with which you're very familiar, how much impact, this is a stupid question, it's so obvious, I don't even know if I want to ask it, but I was thinking of Sumner Redstone and that kind of a strong personality who attracts people who are strong, especially like the CEOs that have come and gone in that group. And it all came down to, from what I've read and experienced a very long time ago in Boston, is that it's an ego thing. And the CEO's ego is first, and you have to accept that. And sometimes it gets difficult, of course. So I'm going to stop talking. Paul.
What, dealing with egos in the entertainment industry? Tim, have you ever had that problem? Jennifer?
Didn't you have Tom Cruise on your payroll, Paul?
Yeah, well, yeah. No, the funny thing is, you guys, the challenges are there, whatever industry you're in, right? Having worked in healthcare, financial services, biotech. Yeah. Okay. Kim, you hit the nail on the head. I think entertainment is a little less employee focused as an industry than others are, or maybe not quite so aware, because the transaction level of that business can be very, very high. But egos are there in the entertainment business, but I'll tell you, they're there when you're dealing with doctors or MD, PhD, research scientists and clinicians. It's part of the factor, Ed. It really is. And some people have an innate ability to be able to calm the room, to be able to bond with people who are difficult to deal with. The funny thing about what we've been talking about, this idea of emotional quotient or emotional intelligence, is it's learnable. It's not like your IQ. Your IQ is fixed at birth. Your EQ, the emotional piece, you can get better at just from listening, becoming a better listener, or trying to show greater empathy. These are things that are actually things that we can improve in ourselves and get higher EQ scores over time. So I would say the ego piece is there. It's probably a beast when you think about the entertainment business, because it's like a picture we have in our heads. But I'll also tell you, from my time at Paramount Pictures and Nickelodeon, Those are some of the nicest, kindest people I'd ever work with. Long tenured. They're really, I've got some of the strongest relationships in my life from my working for the 10 years there at Viacom. So yeah, there's going to be beasts in every business, but the reality is we have to be quick not to, we don't want to just paraphrase or just say, oh, well, entertainment must be so-and-so. They're people. And some people are like that in every industry, and some people are salt of the earth, no matter the industry. So it's a good question, and I'm glad you brought it up. But the reality is, to Kim's point, people are people, and you do your best to foster the best and bring out the best in all of them.
So the latest version appears to be Elon Musk and the people that he's had run-ins with at Twitter.
Yikes!
I know,
Yeah.
that's a monster.
It's turned into a publicity nightmare from what I can see. I don't know anyone who works for Twitter. So I can't say, I have inside experience, but just from what I continue to read and the comments that are made and the culture that's coming out, I don't know what's going on there. For so long, the impression in my mind is that Elon Musk was there at doing what he was doing with the battery research and at Tesla. And then you had at Virgin, what's his name? His name just slipped my mind. Who's the
Branson?
Yeah, Branson. And
Branson.
comparing the two leadership styles. Well, forget about it now. I mean, I'm sorry, but Elon Musk is, I don't know what he's doing these days. And I don't mean to offend anyone if they work for any of his companies, but it is really difficult to see. And it's hard to think that doesn't become pervasive in the workplace. When you see mean, nasty kinds of things out there, the extrapolation from that to how the employees may be being treated, I don't know, because I don't know anyone, but you can only assume that does trickle down. It starts at the top, and that becomes part of a culture very, very quickly. So CEOs have to be really, business owners have to be careful. The way they treat others is typically karma. It does come back, and you just have to be cautious. As long as you can practice that idea of selfless leadership, kindness, putting other people's needs ahead of your own, that will be your culture. But to the degree that things happen that are said that are inappropriate or hurtful or harmful and done in public and done electronically, listen, that's going to become part of the culture too. So there could be a damage control issue at hand.
Kim, it seems that at Herbalife Nutrition, people want to work there.
Yeah. In fact, we just yesterday found out, I'm like, oh, I hope it's not too soon to mention it. Well, I'll just say we just got another achievement award from an outside organization of best places to work. So around the globe last year, I think we had like 18 different awards, and it's a unique culture. Oh, thank you. And it's a unique culture, one that, the company's been around, 40 some years, and the founder came from very humble roots. I mean, he actually was a high school dropout, and his goal was, at that point, it was really focused on, just weight loss, but then over time became more about wellness and nutrition and overall success as a human. And so its roots are humble, and that's throughout the culture, in that yes, there's definitely hierarchy. There's no question about that, but not from an accessibility standpoint. And kind of going back to something Steve said, I mean, like, that accessibility really drives that a feeling of value that people have, that connectedness to the organization. And one of the things when I first joined the company that just made me so happy was it felt like all employees were focused on the same thing of, like, how do we make our distributors or the company better? And I frankly wasn't that used to that. I mean, because there was, there's always so many fiefdoms and that kind of thing. And the breaking down to the point of what Paul was saying about, more that servant leadership, that, selfless leadership, it has really led to a lot of long-term employees and just a high level of dedication and commitment from our employees.
Gary, what about looking for people with all those skills that Kim just mentioned?
Well, then
And
you've got
how do you
magic.
get rid, and how do you get rid of people who don't have those skills?
Well, that's that magic that Kim's referring to. I was thinking about, we have the opportunity to go after those passive employees, those passive senior management and executives that most of the time aren't looking for a job. And this pesky headhunter, we find them, we reach out, we connect, we talk. It's a safe place for them because confidentiality is a big deal for us, both for our client as well as the employee that might be looking. And I was thinking as you're talking there's really 4 or 5 reasons as to why somebody would listen to us for a new job opportunity. And I'll get back to the question here very directly. They can take the safe route and say, look, I want to make more money, which oftentimes that's like 3rd or 4th or 5th. They can talk about career growth. They're stymied because the guy or gal in front of them, is going to be there forever. And so there's not a spot available for them. They're not learning new stuff. They're not learning current ways of doing things. They might be in a bad geography, and so they want to do that for family reasons, et cetera. But I'll tell you, I'll bet half the times when I'm talking to someone, they have that bad boss. And so if I were commanding a CEO, one of his or her jobs ought to be finding out within his or her company the bad bosses. They're driving people out. They're ticking people off. And I have several other more colorful words there to use, but I won't. And so they're driving people out. And usually the great people that are driven out go away, are gone, are lost from that company when the bad boss is found out, and then he or she's finally canned, and a new person comes in. So you find out the bad bosses and either fix them or take them out behind the woodshed, as Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank would say. But find the great bosses. Who are the magnets? Who draw the great people? Who can find those people smarter than the average person in the organization? Who has that excitement, that passion? Kim, you said the people are all working for the same thing. Isn't that what the fundamental situation is for a CEO? Get that whole team of 10 people or 10,000 people working for the same thing. Make it value add. It gets me excited when you get someone then that you've been in a room where you've heard a few hours worth of stuff, and that fantastic CEO can put that into 2 or 3 sentences about the issue. He or she can say, here are the choices, and I support B. Who feels like that? And then, as Walt Disney said, enough talking and let's start doing. The more complicated we make it, the more buzzwords we put on it, the more BS that's added to it, I think the less gets done.
Stephen?
Thanks, Ed. I just want to make the point, since this is global TV, that this is not a U.S. phenomenon. McKinsey did research in December last year, so a couple months ago, of 16,000 people in Europe, and one third said they expected to quit their jobs in the next 3 to 6 months, and they cited lack of career development, lack of career advancement, and uncaring and uninspiring leaders as the top reasons for that. And then, going back to the topic for today, read a great book by Michael Bunting called The Mindful Leader. And he says 33% of a team member's mental health is attributed to their leader's behavior. So, and then you add to that some other research that shows 83% of employees worldwide say that mental health is as important as their salary. You put those 3 things together and you're it's like a nuclear fusion. You see why this stuff is bubbling over on a worldwide basis.
Paul, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would. Stephen, you hit the nail on the head. I think that COVID has brought out all these things, right? No one's alive from the last time we had a situation like this, a pandemic. That was in 1918 after World War I. If they happen to still be alive, they can't help us anyway, because the workplace has changed so much since then. But when you do these studies, and Stephen, you're right, I forgot to mention that this is global too. These trends that we're seeing, one of the things that comes out when you study the Gen Y and the Gen Z is they want to work for an ethical employer, for a management team that cares about them personally. And that keeps coming up spot after spot after spot. When I wrote my new book on workplace ethics, it's because you can see this trend. I mean, this trend is already out there, but what does it mean to be an ethical employer? And what does it mean to have a leadership team that cares for their workers? So the funny thing is, when I do my training, now that I'm a consultant and I'm going out there and doing these management training workshops, it's very easy. I do an exercise and I open up the workshop on leadership offense, how to become a great leader. So tell me about your favorite boss. And people start saying right away, it's someone who trusted me. It's someone who challenged me to do things I didn't even think I was ready for yet. It's someone who always had my back. And what you realize is you're talking about that person's character. You're talking about their caring. And in that sense, we've got something very wrong that we're doing. We're doing this. We always focus on what are you doing all the time, to the point where we're chasing our tails with our hair on fire. To be the greatest boss, it's a matter of who are you being. It's that beingness that makes the difference. And if we can just calm the room a little bit, again, I use that expression, but everyone needs to kind of stop and slow down for a little bit. We're moving too quickly. To be someone's favorite boss, it's going to be your character that matters. You'll do certain things based on who you are and who your character and your level of caring is. But Stephen, I have to imagine this complements what you're writing in Humanity too. It's that same idea. People want to work for someone who cares about them personally. And that's not just Gen Y and Gen Z. That was me as a baby boomer. It was Gen X too. It's the traditionalist generation. They just weren't studied the same way. So they didn't have all this stuff documented. Yep. These are, again, noble things that we should all be focusing on as smart employers to help retain the best talent we can.
Okay, Gary, then Jennifer.
Paul, I would add the idea that you can be the being part all day long. Agreed. But what you're doing, is it the right stuff? I think so many organizations and so many people, so many jobs are doing what the heck they've been doing forever just because. So let's stop for a moment. What's the most important thing? What's the most priority thing? What's the part with the best ROI? What's the customer that we're in most risk with? We haven't gone there and taken their temperature and show that we care. Well, let's work the right stuff and then do it right. I suspect the doing part of most everybody's job, if you took a list of 100 items that you're supposed to be doing, I'll bet half of them don't matter. I'll bet half of them don't matter. Just stop. I had a couple of situations with a client where they were going to go into a work reduction and everybody was really upset about that. Go in and find out what you're doing. And I think half of them don't need to be done. They don't matter. Stop doing it and see if anybody's the squeaky wheel on it.
So, Paul, with SHRM in the lead, I guess, after President Biden's relaxing of the COVID rules and all that stuff, this is like a headhunter's dream, this period of time right now?
It's a good question, and that's TBD. The funny thing is, right, I just read in SHRM yesterday that it looks like May 11th is the date that President Biden will be making. His administration is basically saying we can put these COVID protections and Uber sanctions behind us. But yeah, we're going to see. Our CEO is going to rush people back in and say 5 days a week or you're out of job. Are people going to really resist this whole idea of I don't want to go back to the office because I'm still afraid of COVID because it's still out there. I don't care what the government says. These are real. We're building the plane while we're flying it right now, Ed. And it is difficult. We are doing our best to communicate. I could see that. We're doing our best to care. We're doing our best to be empathetic. But you're not going to capture everybody's heart at a situation like this. People are still frightened. The pandemic scares a lot of people for good reason. There's a lot still going on out there, whether or not the government decides, okay, we're done. And yeah, there may be people who feel like they need to flee and find something else because they feel like their company is tone deaf. And that feeds right into Gary's No, I'm kidding, Gary. I'm just kidding. But people will reach out to executive recruiters and say, hey, you know what? I don't agree philosophically with where my company is now. I think it's time for me to make a change. So we may still continue to see this scattering, this scattergram of talent, which we knew was going to come once COVID was starting to end, because people felt like they've been treading water career-wise for the last 3 years, and they want to make up for lost time.
So Jennifer, why is there such a shortage of therapists?
It's a good question. I mean, I don't really know the answer to that. I think a lot of people needed mental health over the last few years, and a lot of people started getting virtual therapy. And so it just became too many people and too few therapists. I think a lot of people that were doing therapy left the field. I think a lot of medical professionals left the field during COVID at some point. But there's also a lot that no longer or don't take health insurance. And that is a huge problem, because if you cannot afford the care that you need, then you are not going to get that care. And if a therapist is charging $300 a visit because they don't take health insurance, you are not going to access that care. And if that's the only person that's returning your call, that's the problem that we're in right now.
So what about a group like BetterHelp.com, telemedicine? I speak of that, and full disclosure, they're one of my advertisers, and they have spoken at my meetings in the live conference days, 3 years plus going back. But isn't that a vehicle?
Absolutely, they are, and they take a number of different insurance plans, which is a great option for a lot of people. It's not an option for everybody, because there are a number of people that really feel that they need an in-person connection, and that is where some people find themselves in a dark hole that they can't get themselves out of, because they have been so isolated, because they have been at home for almost 3 years and they don't know what to do. And that's where we need to find other avenues of getting people help. And we need to be able to give them some other sources that will allow them in-person support.
Thank you. Stephen, we're coming up to a close in 7 or 8 minutes, but I want to give the floor to you. And you are experiencing your own Zoom growth with this new book and your consultancy business. So how are you managing yourself with all these pressures?
Well, I hired a personal trainer 4 months ago, and I've lost like 17 pounds or something. So I walk the talk. I mean, in the book, I talk about well-being, and I talk about the company's responsibilities now in the areas of well-being. And, one thing everyone I coach these days in leadership, I say, go to Google and Google, or buy my book, but if not, go to Google and Google what are the 5 top causes of burnout at work. Very easy to find. And what are the leading indicators, the leading signals? I mean, there's about 7 or 8 signals of burnout. And if leaders, and I talked to a leader the other day, I'll be real fast for you here. He said, look, I'm not a psychiatrist. Why should I talk to employees about burnout? I said, because it's simple. You don't have to be a psychiatrist to talk about it. You have to be a human being. Talk to them. You need to recognize it. If you see these signs in your employees, then it's time to if you don't feel comfortable, find somebody else in the organization. But I think organizations need to make leaders comfortable to have these conversations, and that will help. What Jennifer's talking about, it'll reduce the demand, because obviously the supply of professional help is not there. Well, let us reduce the demand, the need for it.
I'm speechless here.
Sorry.
Gary, you're loquacious.
See, I think celebrations of wins, and especially not to the person so much as the team that made it happen, Why are you in business? Let's go back to fourth grade here. Why is the company in business? What are you getting done? What are you making happen? You know, it ought to be a place where the work and the personal life is balanced. I'm particularly empathetic to that woman who is married or not, but has kids. And these last 2-3 years have been hell on wheels. That parent has kids coming back home, going back to school, coming back home, trying to do a job. You know, how in the world that person, if she's married and stays married and has a happy husband, a happy significant other, how do you keep the kids balanced? How'd you keep your job? I think that's been unbelievably challenging. And, you know, I've had a couple folks that have worked for me that have been faced in that challenging thing. We have clients that, I mean, it's tough. I will go back to one thing. Turn your org chart upside down and pretend and feel and act like it works for the customer.
That's right.
If you're not getting something done for that customer, you know, why do you, the company, exist, and why do you as an employee have a job?
So one of the things that I've learned is exactly that, and I've turned it vis-a-vis my one-on-one interview shows as a revenue producer for me. And that's asking the guest, interview subject, to just tell a story, say one thing, reveal one customer who has benefited from your product. Talk about it without mentioning the names. And that's really become like a Zoom. It is just identified the exact purpose of the one-on-one interview programs. Kim, I see you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to jump in about leadership that's just slightly different take, which is one of the things we've done at Herbalife is we've been having a series of global leadership sessions. And the last one was yesterday, was specifically about navigating change and leading with empathy. And that's what we've been talking about. But the one piece that we emphasized, because it was specifically focused on leaders, is leadership self-compassion. And that's so critical, because I can say whatever I want, but if you see that I'm never sleeping, I'm always on, and I'm like, but don't worry, you know, go off, you're not going to feel comfortable. It's not going to be that safe environment. In fact, like one of the things that I learned was in terms of burnout, if the leader is being self-compassionate, taking care of themselves, walking the talk from a personal standpoint, burnout is down 36% versus other leaders. So I just wanted to add that to all the pieces about leadership that we've been talking about.
Yes. Stephen, would you like to sum up and take give us an idea of just one or two chapters that you especially love, having heard all of this conversation in the past hour?
I'll sum up the conversation. I really don't want to promote the book because I think I want to add to what Kim just said. It's not only the self-compassion, it starts at you. And like you asked me the question, I have to walk the talk. I coach people on this. I can't be at all hours of the day and not getting my right sleep and everything else. But one other thing to add to what Kim just said is also goes back to what I was emphasizing before. And I just looked this up. Gallup had some research a couple of years ago, or maybe it was last year, said that employees whose manager is always willing to listen to their work-related problems are 62% less likely to burn out. And so it goes right back, I think Paul kicked us off with listening skills at the very beginning. So to summarize, it just goes right back to, as leaders, we need to listen. We have new responsibilities. We don't have to be psychiatrists, but we have to be human beings, and we have to show empathy. We have to show compassion. We have to show kindness. And you know what? If we all did this, we would change the little bits of the world that we live in. And then collectively, we can end up changing the world, or at least a significant part of the world. hopefully we would see less fights on airplanes, less fight at Dodger Stadium, less road rage incidents. I mean, the entire world is spring-loaded and pissed off. And we could do a lot if we would just show compassion, some kindness, some respect, some empathy to one another. That's how I would sum up today's conversation.
So, Paul, how are you going to celebrate St. Patty's Day next week?
I see something green and I see beer. I don't know. Those are the two things that come to mind all the time. I don't know. It's a good question. I tell you what, Steve, you hit the nail on the head, though. Seriously, I had written an article for HR Magazine just about a month or so ago, talking about making it safe for your employees to be vulnerable. And in that, you can sense when your people are wired and when they're nervous, and you just need to call a quick meeting with your direct reports and check in. No, you cannot change the world, but you can tell them, can I help? Or what can we do collectively as a team to help you? And just making it safe for people to be able to talk about it and know that it's safe and make themselves vulnerable in a healthy sense, it will take away that anxiety, that angst. And I think it really helps. You can do this individually. You can do it as a team. You can even do it on St. Patty's Day. So it all works.
and quite honestly, Paul, it would also take away the stigma, because unfortunately, mental health as a phrase has a stigma to it, particularly in the workplace. And not to say anyone's wrong when they say that, but again, what I'm trying to do is encourage people to talk about mental well-being. Has a different ring to it, doesn't have the stigma to it.
That's a great point. Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And in fact, we have a series of emotional well-being, taking it even just a little further away from the mental health, right? I completely agree.
Jennifer, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Gary, good to see you again. Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
And
I want to add a perhaps controversial, but the big but here, the elephant in the room's got to be talked about. If there's something big, bad risk or threat to your company, it's got to be able to be safely brought up. It's got to be able to be addressed so that great business person on the team is never afraid to bring up the issues that perhaps might be the best opportunity for you as a company or as a threat. I just wanted to make sure we have front and center on that. Great to be here, Ed. Thank you.
thank you, Kim, for your time. And I look forward to walking on that beach someday.
You're welcome anytime.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Thank you all. And please come back. Let's do an update next month or the month after.
Thank you. It's
Sounds
great.
wonderful.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Global TV signing off.